Rain tapped steadily against the bay windows of Evelyn Martin's quiet cottage. The clock above the fireplace ticked louder than usual, filling the silence that had loomed ever since Harold, her husband of 42 years, had passed just 3 months earlier. She sipped her chamomile tea, trying to ignore the ache of loneliness that seemed to hollow out her chest more with each passing day. Then, like a spark in the dark, her phone lit up. Lucas. Her son hadn't called in weeks, not since the funeral. Seeing his name on the screen made her heart leap in hope. She fumbled slightly before answering. "Lucas?" she said, her voice catching with emotion. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. How are you holding up?" His voice was casual, even breezy. Evelyn smiled despite herself. "I'm managing. It's been quiet. But hearing your voice helps. Thank you for calling." There was a brief pause. "Yeah, of course. Anyway, just wanted to make sure you're okay. Gotta run. I'll call again soon." And just like that, the call ended. Or so she thought. She placed the phone on the table, about to return to her tea when she noticed something strange. Lucas hadn't hung up. His voice continued, now muffled and distant, as if he'd placed his phone in his pocket. Evelyn's hand froze midair. "God, she's so needy," Lucas muttered. "Every time I call, it's like she's about to burst into tears." Evelyn's heart clenched. "Just put her in a home already," came a second voice. Andrea, sharp, cold, biting. "You know she can't keep that house up by herself. It's time. And the faster we get that power of attorney pushed through, the faster we can, what's the word? Consolidate the inheritance." Evelyn felt her breath leave her body. Her chest tightened. They weren't just discussing her living situation, they were plotting. "Are you sure the second mortgage won't raise suspicion?" Andrea continued. "She's old, but not senile. Yet." "She'll never figure it out," Lucas said. "She trusts me. Besides, Dad's accounts are still in limbo. We'll tell her we're handling everything for tax purposes." Evelyn pressed the phone to her ear, as if proximity would make the pain sting less. Instead, every word dug deeper. "We need that money now, Lucas," Andrea hissed. "You said she'd cave weeks ago. If she doesn't sign that POA soon, we'll make her sign it." "I know. I'll handle it," Lucas said, his voice suddenly grim. Click. The call truly ended this time. Evelyn sat perfectly still. A storm inside her now raged louder than the one outside her window. Her fingers trembled as she lowered the phone. The pain of betrayal was sharp, but what quickly replaced it was colder, steadier, resolve. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't even an emotional outburst. This was strategy. She stood and walked slowly to her late husband's study, a place she hadn't touched since the funeral. Dust floated in the dim light. She opened a drawer filled with Harold's old address books, letters, and war medals. Buried beneath them was a business card with an embossed name. Walter Grayson, Private Investigations, Ret. For when you need the truth, not comfort. Walter had been Harold's oldest friend, a retired detective who'd always said, when you don't trust the people under your roof, you need to look at the foundation. She dialed the number on the card. It rang 3 times. "Grayson," answered a gruff voice. "Walter, it's Evelyn Martin. I need your help." A pause. Then, gentler. "Evelyn, what's happened?" "My son, he called me, but he forgot to hang up." Her voice wavered. "I heard them, him and Andrea, planning to steal everything. My home, Harold's estate. My freedom." Another pause. Then Walter replied with quiet certainty, "I'll be there in the morning." As she hung up, Evelyn leaned against the desk and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. The rain had turned into a downpour. For so long she had worn the mask of a grieving widow, fragile, silent, fading into the background of her family's life. But now, she saw something different in her own eyes. She wasn't broken. She was watching. Lucas thought he'd called a victim. What he didn't realize was that in forgetting to hang up, he'd awakened someone far more dangerous. A mother with nothing left to lose, and everything left to protect. Walter Grayson arrived just after sunrise, his silver Buick humming quietly as it pulled into Evelyn's gravel driveway. The retired detective emerged from the car with a cautious gait, but sharp, watchful eyes. Evelyn opened the front door before he knocked. She'd been waiting since dawn, too restless to sleep. "You weren't kidding," he said, stepping inside. "You look like you haven't shut your eyes all night." "I haven't," Evelyn replied, voice tight. "I kept hearing their voices, over and over." Walter nodded and followed her to the study. The space had transformed since Harold's death. It was no longer a memorial but a command center. Files were spread across the desk, drawers open, a notepad scrawled with thoughts Evelyn hadn't dared speak aloud until now. She handed him the phone. "I recorded the last minute of the call. I don't know if it's usable, but I need proof." Walter took it, listened, and his eyes narrowed. "Andrea's smart, but she talks too much when she thinks no one's listening. That's our leverage." "I don't understand how they could do this," Evelyn whispered, the weight in her chest nearly buckling her. "He's my son." Walter didn't respond at first. He simply opened his briefcase and pulled out a slim laptop. "Let's start with your finances. I want to see if they've already moved on anything. If they're talking this openly, they've probably already made the first moves." Evelyn hesitated, then handed him a manila envelope. "These are all the statements from Harold's accounts and mine. I don't know what I'm looking for, but something feels off." Walter flipped through the documents, eyes scanning quickly. Then he stopped. "Here, this transfer. $10,000 withdrawn just 2 weeks after Harold passed, from a joint account he held with you. Was this your doing?" Evelyn leaned forward. "No, I haven't touched that account. And look at this," he said, pulling up the online banking portal. "There's a line of credit, secured against your home. Opened last month." She stared at the screen in disbelief. "That can't be right. Harold would never." "It's in your name," Walter said grimly. "But the signature here. Look closely." Evelyn brought out a copy of her signature from old tax forms. Side by side, the differences were subtle but clear. The loop on the M in Martin was too round, the E too sharp. Forgery. Her hands began to tremble. "They've already started siphoning the estate," Walter said. "The money's likely been moved into a different account, or into cash by now. If we act fast, we can at least freeze some of it." "But how?" Evelyn asked. "Won't that tip them off?" Walter smiled faintly. "They already think you're weak. They're not watching you. That's our advantage." As the two dug deeper into the accounts and paperwork, another troubling discovery emerged: a power of attorney draft. Unsigned but prepared. It named Lucas as the sole decision-maker for Evelyn's medical and financial matters. The document had been created by an attorney she didn't know. "This guy's based out of Clearwater," Walter said, checking the letterhead. "I'll bet Andrea or Lucas paid him off, hoping to rush it through while you're still grieving." "I feel like I'm living someone else's nightmare," Evelyn muttered. Walter paused and looked at her with something between pity and admiration. "No, you're waking up. That's the difference." Later that afternoon, Evelyn retrieved a small lockbox from her bedroom closet. Inside was an old file folder Harold had marked private. She'd never opened it. Now she did. Inside were records, notes Harold had kept on their estate, including handwritten concerns about Lucas and Andrea. There were references to strange bank requests Lucas had made months before Harold's death, and a single, cryptic line: "If something happens to me, Evelyn must speak to Margaret. She knows the truth." Evelyn blinked. "Margaret, my sister?" Walter straightened. "I thought she vanished after that falling out 20 years ago." "She did. We haven't spoken since the family trust was divided. But Harold, he always thought she blamed us for how things turned out." Walter made a note. "She could be a link, or a loose end. Either way, it's not a coincidence your husband mentioned her and suspected something would happen. Evelyn suddenly saw the larger picture forming, one more intricate, more calculated than she'd realized. Lucas wasn't just greedy, he was working off a blueprint. Someone had prepared him for this. Walter packed up his laptop. I'm going to start pulling background checks. I want to know where your money went, who's behind the legal documents, and what your son's been doing behind closed doors. But Evelyn? Yes? You need to keep playing dumb. Be fragile. Be naive. Let them think they still have the upper hand. But behind that smile, you stay alert. Because this isn't just about money anymore, this is about power, control, and revenge. Evelyn nodded slowly, the weight in her chest replaced by something cold and steady. Her instincts weren't wrong. This betrayal wasn't just a moment of weakness from her son. It was a performance. Rehearsed, polished, and part of something much bigger. And now, the curtain was rising. Evelyn Martin stood in her attic, the musty air thick with the scent of mothballs, old cedar, and secrets. She'd come here looking for her wedding album, something to ground her after Walter's disturbing discoveries, but her fingers had landed on a battered leather-bound photo album she hadn't seen in decades. The cover was scuffed, the corners curling, but when she opened it, memories came flooding back. Birthdays, holidays, and snapshots of a life that had once felt so certain. Her fingers brushed across a photograph of Lucas at age 4, his bowl-cut hair, wide blue eyes, and a birthday cake smeared across his cheeks. She smiled faintly until something caught her eye. A faded hospital bracelet lay tucked between the pages. It bore her maiden name, Evelyn Taylor, and a birth date. But the baby ID tag next to it didn't say Lucas Martin. It read, Baby Boy, Turner, Room 302, Mother, Evelyn Taylor. Date, July 14, 1986. Evelyn's breath hitched. That wasn't Lucas's birthday. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the album, finding more inconsistencies. Photos she'd always assumed were of Lucas as a baby now looked oddly unfamiliar. A different nose, a different jawline. Her mind swirled, reaching back into memories blurred by time and trauma. Harold had always handled the legal paperwork. He was there when Lucas was born, of course, but she'd been sedated, the delivery complicated, a C-section. She remembered waking up hours later with a newborn in her arms and a nurse saying everything had gone fine. But what if it hadn't? Fueled by a fresh wave of fear, Evelyn called Walter immediately. I need to know something, she said when he picked up. How hard would it be to swap babies in a hospital? There was a pause. Then Walter's voice turned cautious. It's rare, but not impossible, especially back in the 80s, before digital tracking. If someone had motive and access, it could happen. I found a hospital bracelet, Evelyn said quietly. It says Turner, not Martin. Walter arrived within the hour. They went over everything again, carefully, meticulously. Then he made a call to an old contact who worked in medical records for St. Augustine Memorial Hospital, where Lucas had been born. It took some creative maneuvering and a forged authorization form, but by the end of the day, Walter had the answer. Evelyn, he said, gently placing the papers on her dining room table. Your son was listed in the birth logs as Infant Turner. But here's the kicker. Baby Turner was documented as being moved to the nursery at 3:45 a.m. Lucas Martin doesn't appear on the hospital logs until almost 7 hours later. Evelyn stared at the documents, feeling the ground shift beneath her. You think my baby was switched? Walter looked grim. I think it's very likely, and I think Harold suspected something. That note you found, about your sister Margaret knowing the truth, this could be what he meant. Evelyn gripped the table's edge, steadying herself. So where's my real son? Walter tapped the folder. I cross-referenced the records. There was only one other male birth in the maternity ward that night, a Daniel Turner. The mother's name was Evelyn Taylor. Same as yours. We're looking at a textbook case of a paperwork swap. Could it have been a mistake, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe. But after everything we've seen, your son stealing from you, the forged documents, Margaret being somehow involved, I don't think any of this is coincidence. That night, Evelyn sat alone, staring at the decades of memories she now questioned. She remembered brushing Lucas's hair before school, kissing his forehead when he was sick, cheering at his high school graduation. If Lucas wasn't her son by blood, did it make those memories any less real? Yes. And no. The next morning, Evelyn made a decision. With Walter's help, she located Daniel Turner, a quiet, unassuming school teacher living in a modest home just 2 towns over. He was 39, never married. No known parents on record. He had been raised in the foster system after his mother died in a car crash when he was just 6. He's normal, Walter reported. Clean record. Beloved by his students. He teaches literature at a charter school. He volunteers on weekends. If this guy is your biological son, he's everything you'd hope for. Evelyn stood at her window that night, watching the stars emerge in the velvet sky. Her world had turned upside down. Her legal son was a schemer plotting her downfall. Her blood son, a stranger, had lived a life parallel to hers, completely unaware of the family he'd lost. One child had betrayed her. Another had been taken from her. The betrayal wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about identity, about motherhood, about who she had raised and who had been stolen. I need proof, she said to Walter the next morning. Quietly, discreetly, a DNA test. He nodded. Already ahead of you. I've arranged for a test kit. He'll think it's part of an educational ancestry project. We'll know in a week. As Evelyn sealed the envelope containing her hair sample, she felt something shift inside her. She was no longer just fighting to protect her home. She was fighting for her truth, and for the son she never knew she had. Evelyn Martin waited by the front window, fingers nervously twisting the edge of her silk scarf. The DNA results had arrived that morning, delivered in an innocuous white envelope. Walter had called her within minutes, his voice calm, but edged with something tight and reverent. It's confirmed, he said. Daniel Turner is your biological son. The words hadn't fully landed yet. They drifted around her like dust motes in sunlight. Visible, undeniable, but impossible to grasp. Now she sat in her living room, staring at a photograph Walter had pulled from Daniel's school website. A candid shot. Daniel standing in front of a chalkboard, smiling warmly at a group of laughing students. He looked nothing like Lucas. There was something soft in his eyes, a kindness that hadn't been dimmed by cynicism or greed. His face bore hints of Harold's smile, subtle but real. Evelyn felt a strange mixture of awe and mourning. How many birthdays had she missed? How many scraped knees had gone unkissed? How many report cards had been signed by strangers? Her real son was out there, and he had no idea. Later that afternoon, Evelyn sat across from Daniel in a quiet cafe, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. She hadn't told him who she was. Walter had arranged the meeting under the pretense of wanting to donate to Daniel's after-school literacy program. It was the only way to see him without unleashing the chaos she wasn't ready for. Daniel was as gracious and warm in person as he was on paper. He spoke with quiet conviction, describing his students with affection and his work with a sense of purpose Evelyn found magnetic. She saw Harold in his thoughtful pauses, in the way he cocked his head while listening. It was almost unbearable, but just as Evelyn considered revealing everything, Daniel reached into his satchel and pulled out a manila folder. "This is going to sound strange," he said, fidgeting slightly, "but someone mailed me a letter last week. No return address, just questions about my birth. It led me to check some records, and now I'm wondering if there was some kind of mistake." Evelyn's heart lurched. "What kind of mistake?" "My mother, well, the woman who raised me, died when I was 6. There's very little documentation, but I found a birth record that lists my mother's name as Evelyn Taylor. It shook me. Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her cup. She hadn't sent a letter. Walter hadn't either. Someone else was moving. I haven't told anyone, Daniel said, but I feel like I'm walking into a mystery. Like there's a version of my life I was supposed to live, and I missed the turn. Evelyn wanted to tell him. Every instinct in her body screamed to pull him into a hug and whisper, "You didn't miss the turn, it was stolen." But instead, she said softly, "Maybe the truth is still waiting for you." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, something flickering behind his eyes. Then he smiled faintly. Maybe. That night, Evelyn and Walter sat together, going over the timeline. Evelyn's mind was spinning not just with emotion, but with a new realization. Daniel said someone sent him a letter, she whispered. It wasn't us, Walter frowned. That means someone else wants this truth out. Or someone wants to control how it comes out. A chill passed through them. Meanwhile, back at Evelyn's house, Andrea had been calling incessantly. She left voice messages soaked in sugary concern. Just wanted to check in on you, Mom. You've been so distant lately. Lucas, too, had sent flowers, an apology card tucked inside. But Evelyn wasn't fooled. They were watching her, sensing that something was slipping from their grasp. And then, the final twist of the night, Walter called just before midnight. You're not going to like this, he said. But I just got off the phone with my contact at the title office. That second mortgage on your house? It wasn't taken out in your name. It was added to a trust. Evelyn sat up. A trust? I didn't create a new trust. It's one Harold formed years ago, but it was dormant until recently. Someone revived it using forged documents and funneled your property into it. And guess who the new co-trustee is? Lucas, Evelyn said bitterly. No, Walter replied. Margaret, your sister. Evelyn felt the room tilt. She's alive? Evelyn whispered. She's involved? Walter's voice was grave. Very much so. She's the one who changed the paperwork. She's the one who contacted the lawyer in Clearwater. Lucas and Andrea? They're just following instructions. Evelyn's thoughts spun. All this time, she had believed Lucas and Andrea were the architects of her downfall. But now, a deeper, darker force had emerged from the shadows, one she hadn't faced in decades, her estranged sister. The woman she once trusted. The woman who had vanished after a bitter inheritance dispute. The woman who now stood to benefit if Evelyn were declared mentally unfit or legally powerless. Suddenly, this wasn't just about reclaiming her life. It was about surviving a calculated attack from someone who knew her history and was using it as a weapon. The morning after Walter's midnight revelation, Evelyn Martin awoke with a single thought blazing in her mind. They think I'm weak. They think I've already lost. She moved with silent precision through her house, every motion now deliberate. No longer grieving. No longer afraid. She had stared into betrayal and peeled back its rotten layers. Lucas's cruelty, Andrea's greed, and now the ghost from her past, Margaret. Her sister, once her closest confidant, now her hidden enemy. Evelyn stood at her late husband Harold's study desk, where the air still carried faint notes of his cologne and pipe smoke. Her fingers moved over the lockbox that had sat untouched for years. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside, she found the original copy of Harold's will. She had read it 1,000 times before, but now, knowing what she did, she read it through new eyes and saw a loophole. Harold had created a trust, meant to be a financial cushion if anything happened to her, and designated her as sole trustee. But there was a dormant clause. In the event of Evelyn's incapacitation, trusteeship reverts to the next of kin as deemed appropriate, by a court of law. That was what Margaret had manipulated. Using the forged claim that Evelyn was no longer of sound mind, Margaret had reactivated the trust, secured a second mortgage on Evelyn's house, and transferred partial control to Lucas, all while building a case to declare Evelyn mentally unfit. But Evelyn had a plan of her own. She contacted her attorney Helen Davenport, a sharp, silver-haired woman with a reputation for legal traps as elegant as they were deadly. They met at a discreet location, a private library, where Evelyn laid everything on the table: the forged documents, the unauthorized trust activation, the financial siphoning, and the orchestrated smear campaign. "I want to rewrite my will," Evelyn said firmly, sliding over a prepared letter. Helen raised an eyebrow. "Cutting Lucas out?" "Completely." And Andrea. "Everything goes to Daniel Turner. My biological son. We'll keep it sealed. For now." Helen nodded. "And the trust?" "I want the mortgage traced. Every dollar. I want forensic accountants on this. And I want a clause added to my new will. If anyone contests its legitimacy, they are immediately disinherited." Helen gave a thin smile. "Ah! The scorched earth clause. Brutal. Effective. And legal?" Evelyn asked. "Very." Over the next week, Evelyn moved like a woman with new purpose. She had Helen file a motion with the probate court to freeze access to her accounts, citing concerns of fraudulent activity. She also quietly recorded every interaction with Lucas and Andrea, baiting them with small, subtle jabs. At first, Lucas played the doting son, dropping by unexpectedly with soup and platitudes. Andrea sent spa gift cards and passive-aggressive texts, but Evelyn could see it in their eyes: suspicion, anxiety. They knew something had shifted. Then Andrea made her first mistake. One afternoon, she barged into Evelyn's house uninvited, claiming to be concerned about Evelyn's, quote, mental state. Evelyn, prepared, feigned confusion and mild paranoia, mumbling about missing money and hidden cameras. Andrea took the bait and brought in a court-appointed evaluator, hoping to prove Evelyn was slipping into dementia. But Evelyn had already spoken to the evaluator's supervisor. She passed the test with flying colors, and Andrea's lie was officially documented. A day later, Evelyn received a thin envelope containing security camera stills from Walter. The images were time-stamped and clear. Andrea and Margaret meeting secretly at a remote gas station 2 counties over, exchanging envelopes. Evelyn stared at the grainy photo of her sister. Older, sharper, wearing designer sunglasses and a predatory smile. Walter's note read, "She's more involved than we thought. She forged your signature on multiple legal forms using samples she stole decades ago. We have handwriting matches." Then came the real twist. Walter, digging deeper, had found something in Margaret's past: a failed investment scheme tied to the same bank managing Evelyn's trust. Records showed Margaret had lost nearly $500,000 2 years prior. Her sudden interest in Evelyn's estate wasn't personal. It was survival. "She's desperate," Walter said, "and when desperate people corner themselves, they become dangerous." Evelyn's final move came with quiet elegance. She threw a small dinner party, just Lucas and Andrea. Under the guise of making amends, she cooked their favorite meal. She wore a soft lavender dress and even served Lucas his favorite bourbon. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy," she said softly during dessert. "Maybe I was wrong to be so distant. Family matters, right?" Andrea's eyes sparkled. "Of course it does," Lucas smiled, tight-lipped. "We all want what's best for you, Mom." Evelyn tilted her head. "Then I suppose you'll understand why I had to make some changes. Nothing personal, just insurance." Andrea's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I've rewritten my will," Evelyn said simply. "Everything's locked down now. My lawyer has copies. So do my accountants. And I've installed surveillance around the property, just in case someone decides to help themselves again. Lucas went pale. You what? Andrea's hands curled into fists. You're being paranoid, Evelyn. Evelyn met her eyes. Am I? The room fell silent. Later that night, Evelyn stood on her back porch, sipping tea and watching the lights flicker in the distance. The air was heavy with storm clouds, but she felt calm. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back, with the law, with the truth, and with the steely resolve only a mother scorned could summon. And the storm that was coming, it would hit Margaret, Lucas, and Andrea like a reckoning. Evelyn Martin had hosted dozens of dinner parties over the years, holiday feasts, charity soirees, intimate anniversaries with Harold, but this dinner would be different. This one had a purpose, not to bring people together, but to tear the mask off a lie that had lived far too long. She carefully arranged the table, choosing Harold's favorite wine glasses, the fine china, the lace tablecloth her mother had passed down. The whole setup whispered nostalgia, comfort, trust, the bait. But there was one addition no guest could see: 5 hidden cameras, each expertly concealed by Walter's team, one in the chandelier, one under the buffet table, 2 near the wine cabinet, and a tiny lens embedded in the porcelain fruit bowl centerpiece. Audio was wired directly to a secure cloud. The guest list was simple: Lucas, Andrea, and Daniel. Evelyn had called Daniel with a quiet urgency. I need you here. You don't have to say anything. Just be present. I'll explain soon. He'd hesitated, confused, but agreed. Evelyn knew that Daniel's presence would tilt the emotional terrain in just the right way. When the doorbell rang, Evelyn greeted Lucas and Andrea with a carefully composed smile. Lucas looked tense, his eyes darting across the entryway as if he expected a trap. Andrea, dressed in a polished navy sheath dress, wore confidence like armor, but her voice was too sweet, too measured. We're so glad you invited us, Evelyn, she said, placing a hand on her chest. It's been a tense few weeks. We were starting to worry about you. Oh, you know me, Evelyn said brightly, always full of surprises. 10 minutes later, Daniel arrived. Andrea's smile wavered when she saw him. Who's this? She asked with a practiced curiosity. Daniel Turner, Evelyn said, watching Lucas closely. A guest of honor. Lucas's jaw clenched ever so slightly. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not from Daniel's face, but from a deeper place. The name. The files he and Andrea had rifled through. Dinner began with small talk, forced laughter, and veiled barbs. Andrea leaned in at one point and said, Lucas and I have been talking about your future, Evelyn. We really think it's time to consider something more supportive. A place with professional care. Evelyn smiled. Oh, I'm getting plenty of care, from people I trust. The atmosphere shifted. Daniel looked between them, confused. Evelyn offered him a nod. You said there was something you wanted to tell me, he said quietly. Lucas shifted in his seat. What's this about? Evelyn set down her fork and looked directly at Daniel. You're my son. Silence dropped like a hammer. Andrea scoffed. Excuse me? Lucas's voice cracked. Mom, what are you talking about? I mean exactly what I said, Evelyn replied. I gave birth to Daniel Turner. There was a hospital switch. We've confirmed it with sealed records, and DNA Walter helped me investigate. Daniel sat back in stunned silence. I didn't come here for drama, he said softly. I just wanted answers. And you deserve them, Evelyn said. But I also needed you to see what kind of people have tried to rob you and me of a future. Lucas stood suddenly, his face flushing red. This is insane. You can't just replace me with some stranger and rewrite your life, Andrea hissed. You don't have any proof. I have more than proof, Evelyn replied coolly. I have footage. I have financial records. I have the forged documents you helped file. Every conversation you've had in this house over the past 2 weeks? Recorded. Lucas stared at her, the blood draining from his face. You bugged the house? He whispered. No, Andrea snapped. She's bluffing. Evelyn walked to the cabinet, pulled out a remote, and clicked a button. From the mounted TV in the corner, audio crackled to life. We'll move her to Fairgate, and once she's declared unfit, the trust falls to us. Andrea's voice, unmistakably cold, echoed through the room. Her mouth opened slightly, stunned. Evelyn clicked it off. Lucas slumped into his chair. You said we just needed to nudge her, he muttered. You promised it would never come to this. Daniel, speechless, pushed back his plate. I thought I was here to meet someone, he said slowly. I didn't realize I was walking into a war zone. You were born into a war zone, Evelyn replied. One you never asked for. But I'm trying to change that. Lucas suddenly lashed out, pounding the table. You think he's better than me? I was there. I stayed. I took care of you after Dad died. Evelyn's voice was steel. You didn't take care of me. You plotted against me. Then, the final blow came not from Evelyn, but from Daniel. He pulled out a folded letter and laid it on the table. I got this in the mail weeks ago, he said. No return address. Just a note. Ask your mother why she left you. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But now I know. It was a warning. Andrea paled. You never sent that letter, she said to Lucas. Lucas turned to her. No, but I know who did. Margaret, Evelyn said softly. She's trying to fracture us, control the timing, keep us spinning while she drains everything in the background. The room went deathly still. Andrea stood up abruptly and stormed out, but not before whispering venomously, You'll regret this. Lucas followed her, his shoulders slumped. Daniel remained, stunned, silent. Evelyn turned to him, tears quietly streaking her face. I don't want to take anything from you, she said. I just want the truth. And a chance, if you'll have it. Daniel didn't speak, but he reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. In that moment, Evelyn didn't win, she reclaimed. And the final reckoning? It was still coming, because now Margaret knew Evelyn had turned the tables, and soon she'd come out of the shadows. Evelyn had always imagined evil as loud, rage-filled, obvious, sloppy. But Margaret was none of those things. She was quiet, calculating, and had stayed hidden in the shadows for far too long. In the days following the explosive dinner, Evelyn received no word from Lucas or Andrea. Daniel checked in frequently, their bond slowly solidifying with tentative conversations and quiet walks. But Evelyn's instincts remained razor-sharp. Andrea's venomous threat still rang in her ears. You'll regret this. And now, Evelyn knew where the next blow would come from. Walter Grayson, ever tireless, returned to Evelyn's house with a folder tucked beneath his arm. He laid it on the kitchen table and opened it with a slow exhale. It's time you knew everything, he said grimly. The folder contained dozens of documents, bank transfers, property deeds, notarized forms. But the names were the shock. Margaret Hastings. Her sister. Her blood. The one person Evelyn had once trusted to help raise Lucas during those early, chaotic years of widowhood. Walter tapped the topmost document. This is the authorization that reopened Harold's trust. It's not Lucas's signature, it's Margaret's. She used a forged, durable power of attorney. Filed through a shell company in Delaware. The money siphoned out of your estate? It didn't go to Lucas. It went to her. Evelyn stared, pulse pounding. She used Lucas as a distraction, she murmured. Made me believe he and Andrea were the masterminds. She used them, Walter corrected. But she created Andrea. What are you talking about? Walter hesitated. Then he pulled out a weathered photo. It showed 2 girls, teenagers, laughing on a beach. Evelyn blinked. She recognized Margaret immediately. But the second girl, that's Andrea? She was only 16 then. Margaret took her in when she was kicked out of her home, groomed her, funded her education, introduced her to Lucas at a charity gala 10 years ago. Andrea didn't seduce her way into your family. Margaret sent her. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She's been planning this for over a decade, she whispered. And it goes deeper, Walter said. I traced Margaret's financials. She's broke. 5 years ago, she made a series of terrible investments. Offshore gambling syndicates, crypto mining scams, a fraudulent vineyard in Argentina. She lost everything. That's when she targeted your estate. This was never about revenge. No, Evelyn said coldly. It was about survival. Just then, Evelyn's phone buzzed. A private number. She answered cautiously. Hello? A familiar voice purred through the line. Sister. Evelyn froze. I figured by now you've pieced it all together, Margaret said, her voice silk wrapped in steel. Clever girl. Always a step behind, but never off the board. You're a parasite, Evelyn said flatly. You manipulated my son, defrauded my estate, and tried to erase me. You erased me first, Margaret snapped. You married Harold while I was still in love with him. You built a family, a life, while I scraped by on your leftovers. He chose me. That wasn't my fault. He should have been mine, Margaret hissed. Everything you had should have been mine. So yes, I took it. I used your son. I built my own empire, brick by stolen brick. But why reveal yourself now? Because I have nothing left to hide, Margaret said. And you have everything left to lose. The line went dead. Evelyn stood in silence. Margaret's voice still echoed in her ears, haunted, furious, unhinged. But something else stirred beneath the surface. Desperation. Margaret was cornered, and dangerous people were never more reckless than when they had nothing left. 2 days later, Evelyn returned from the store to find her front door slightly ajar. Her heart clenched. She stepped inside. The house was silent, but wrong. The hallway light was on, the curtains slightly parted. She moved cautiously, phone in hand. In the living room sat Margaret, calm, dressed in black, holding a glass of wine as if she owned the place. Took you long enough, she said. Do sit down. Evelyn remained standing. You broke into my home. No, I returned to mine. You've lost your mind. Margaret stood slowly, eyes glittering. I lost everything the day Harold married you. I built this plan to reclaim what should have been mine. And I would have succeeded if not for your ridiculous will rewrite and that stray mutt of a son you dug up. You mean my real son, Evelyn said. Margaret's jaw twitched. You always had the perfect answer. But you're not strong, Evelyn. You're just lucky. And luck runs out. Before Evelyn could respond, a sharp knock rang at the door. Margaret's smile vanished. Evelyn opened the door to find 2 uniformed officers, and Helen, her lawyer, behind them. Ms. Hastings, Helen said coolly, we have a warrant for your arrest. Charges include identity theft, elder abuse, estate fraud, and conspiracy to defraud. Margaret lunged, but the officers were faster. As she was handcuffed and dragged out, she spat. This isn't over. Evelyn stepped forward. Yes, Margaret, it is. The door shut behind the screaming woman, and for the first time in weeks, Evelyn exhaled. But as she turned back to Helen, another twist surfaced. We need to talk, Helen said, pulling out her phone. Lucas has filed a countersuit. He's claiming undue influence, says you manipulated him with false evidence. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She wasn't done yet. Evelyn Martin never imagined her life would end up here, standing in a packed courtroom, flanked by her lawyer on one side and her newly found son on the other. Her hands were steady, her eyes sharp. If this was to be the final battle, she intended to win it on her feet, not from a hospital bed in some nursing home. Forgotten and manipulated. The courtroom was hushed. On the opposite bench sat Lucas, pale, lips tight, his suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. Andrea was notably absent. Rumor had it she'd cut a deal with prosecutors and vanished overseas. Margaret, now in custody and awaiting separate criminal charges, would not be joining them either. Lucas had filed a countersuit, claiming Evelyn had emotionally manipulated him, rewritten her will under duress, and disinherited him without cause. He was seeking to have the will invalidated. It was a desperate move, and a dangerous one, but Evelyn came armed. Her attorney Helen opened the defense with a quiet thunder. This case isn't about a disinherited son. It's about a decades-long deception orchestrated by a woman who exploited her family, her sister's grief, and her own nephew. Lucas Martin may have been caught in Margaret Hastings's web, but he still made choices. Cruel ones. She tapped the first exhibit, the hidden audio recordings from Evelyn's home. The room filled with Lucas and Andrea's voices, laughing as they plotted to manipulate Evelyn into a nursing facility. Lucas winced, his eyes closing as the words echoed back at him. Next came the forged documents. Walter had tracked each form to a post office box rented under a fake name, cross-referenced with surveillance footage of Margaret in a red coat with Andrea beside her. And then the pièce de résistance. Testimony. Evelyn took the stand. "I loved my son," she began softly, eyes glistening. "Even when I overheard him speaking about me like a burden, I wanted to believe he was just lost. But then I found the forged documents, the false mortgage, the sealed hospital files. I didn't want to uncover what I did, but I couldn't ignore the truth." Lucas stood abruptly, his voice cracking. "You threw me away like garbage the moment you found him." He pointed at Daniel, who sat quietly in the gallery. "I was your son for 40 years. "You were my son in every way that mattered," Evelyn said, standing straighter. "But instead of coming to me, instead of talking to me, you schemed with Andrea and Margaret. You weren't betrayed, Lucas. You betrayed me." The judge banged his gavel for order. The prosecution called Daniel next. Nervous but composed, he took the stand. "I didn't know I was adopted until a month ago," he said. "When Evelyn reached out, I didn't know how to feel. But she never once asked me for anything. No money, no loyalty, just the truth." Then came the final witness, Walter Grayson. With the calm authority only a former detective could exude, he presented the timeline of Margaret's manipulation, linking her financial collapse to the estate fraud and placing Lucas and Andrea as her willing pawns. When Lucas's lawyer tried to claim he was coerced, Walter countered with a damning fact. Lucas signed an affidavit months earlier authorizing Margaret to act on his behalf with full knowledge. It wasn't forged, it was voluntary. Lucas crumbled in his chair. By the end of the week-long hearing, the judge delivered a cutting verdict. Lucas Martin's countersuit is without merit. The will shall stand as valid. The court finds compelling evidence of financial manipulation, but also notes Mr. Martin's willing participation. While he may have been misled by Margaret Hastings, he acted with agency. The estate belongs to Evelyn Martin and her heirs as determined by her will. Evelyn didn't gloat. She simply turned to Daniel and whispered, "We're free." But even as the courtroom emptied, Helen handed Evelyn a thin envelope. "This came yesterday. It's from Andrea. From Italy." Evelyn opened it in private later that night. Inside was a single page. "You think you won. But Margaret taught me everything. Enjoy your peace, Evelyn. While it lasts. There's always a next move. No signature. Just a lipstick print." Evelyn folded the letter and placed it in the fire. "I'm done playing your game," she said, watching the flames curl. The following weeks were filled with healing. Lucas, shamed and legally cut off, moved to a quiet town upstate. Evelyn sent him a single letter, offering forgiveness, but not reconciliation. Margaret was sentenced to 12 years in prison. And Evelyn? She walked through her garden beside Daniel, the wind carrying memories and promises alike. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. For the first time in her life, Evelyn was not just surviving. She was choosing. And though the game had ended, one thing remained certain. She would never be underestimated again.